Amelia Horner here. I wanted to quickly go over informative speaking, which is one of the 4 speeches that you guys will be giving in the course. So, I've uploaded a PowerPoint on informative speaking to Canvas so you can follow along as I extrapolate on the content of the PowerPoint. Also, read chapter 14 in the textbook, which is called Informative Speaking, and gives a good overview. All right. So the basic definition of informative speaking is that you're trying to convey information about a specific topic to an audience, right? And that audience can either be people who already have a pretty good understanding of the topic or know nothing about the topic or anywhere in between. Okay. So there's 4 types of informative speaking: definition, descriptive, explanatory, and demonstrative. And they all do slightly different things, but overlap in the sense that they are all conveying a set of information to your audience. So, definitional speaking basically means that you're trying to convey the meaning of a word or concept to the audience. So, you're trying to educate them. So, for example, if you were taking a philosophy class and your professor wanted to convey the definition of the word epistemology to the students, the professor might have a lecture called like Intro to Epistemology, and they're like, so what epistemology means is the philosophy of knowledge, right? They're conveying that definition to the students in this case. So topics can be broad or specific. They basically exist to explain the meaning of a word, and the goal is to educate. So that is definition. All right, moving on. So then we have demonstration speech. I like to think of this as if anyone has seen like a cooking show. So it usually includes visual examples or involves a step-by-step process on how to do something. So if there is a cooking show, you're going to see like a clear visual example of how a specific meal is made. All the steps are laid out for you, and it's very clear, right? So I think that demonstration is good because a lot of people are visual learners. It can be hard to understand stuff without seeing that literal visual, especially if it's a type of, like I said, cooking, but also like if someone's teaching you how to swim, right? It's very confusing to be like, yeah, you move one arm over the other arm, but if you just kind of do the motion, it can be clear. So that is demonstration. And that's the second one. So we have definition and demonstration so far. Next, we have explanatory speech. So an explanatory speech describes the current condition of a topic. Usually this uses data or statistics, and I like to think of this as the most complicated form of informative speaking, where you're trying to like really break down a situation. So, for example, if you were to give a speech on the specific foreign policy relations between the United States government and Afghanistan. So if you were like, here's the specific timelines on the war in Afghanistan, here's the specific relationship between the United States government and the Taliban, between the other sort of different factions involved in the country, etc., etc. It's a very complicated conveying of information, right? So you're trying to break it down sort of part by part, step by step, using different like facts and figures to explain the information. So that's an explanatory speech. Yeah. And then the last one is a descriptive speech. So in a descriptive speech, you're trying to paint a picture for the audience, right? So this uses imagery, and you're trying to break it down into parts. So imagine you're trying to tell someone about a vacation you went on, or you're trying to explain the geography of like Central Park. Like if you were trying to tell someone who'd never been to New York what Central Park is like, and you're like, so here's the lake, and here's the like the carousel, and here's the different like bike paths or vendors or the restaurant or the lawns, right? So it uses imagery is the biggest difference there. So those are the 4 types of informative speeches, right? Where you're conveying information to the audience. You're not trying to persuade the audience. You're not trying to make them change their mind about something. You're just trying to say this is like a set of facts or descriptors or information about a topic. So definition, which is where you're just breaking down a concept or word or idea. Descriptive, right, which is where you are sort of conveying, you're conveying like a picture of something. It uses imagery, that kind of thing. Then explanatory, where you're trying to break down complicated information step by step. Or demonstrative, which is where you are literally doing examples of the topic to pass the information on. So like the cooking show example. All right, so those are the 4 types of informative speaking. Now I would like to go into how to pick a topic, because that's the next step. So once you know the different types of informative speaking, you have to then decide what topic do you guys want to pick, since you guys are going to be doing an informative speech. So obviously you want to think of something interesting. You want to be considering, is the audience specifically interested in your topic? You don't want to choose something that is too narrow and too specific that it's only would be interested, that only people who had studied that field for years would be interested in it, right? You want something that your average person on the street could find interesting and want to know more about. Next, you want to choose something that's important, right? If you're like looking at something that will never ever be relevant to anyone's life, no one's going to find it interesting, and no one's going to deem that as something worth listening to, right? It needs to have some sort of relevance to your audience. Next, it can be helpful to choose something that you already have some knowledge in. This is simply for the fact that it can be hard to research starting from nothing, right? You can choose something that you don't really know that much about if it's something that you've always wanted to know more about. But generally speaking, it's more valuable to pick a topic that you already have some sort of prior knowledge or interest in. And lastly, it can be helpful to pick a topic that you believe that others should know more about, right? I like to think of this as an opportunity for you to tell your audience, in video form in this case, this is your chance to say, this is a topic I know about and I've researched and I've like sort of planned out a good way to convey the information, and it's something I think that people should know more about, right? So it can be a topic that you say, like, there's a deficit of knowledge about this among the people around me, and I wish they knew more about it, right? So interesting, important, something you're knowledgeable about, and something you think others should know more about. So I came up with a real quick writing activity. You can do it in like literal writing or just sort of mentally go over these questions. And I thought it was helpful for coming up with potential topics on informative speeches. So topic selection. So some questions that I thought people could ask themselves are, what is going on in my life that bothers or concerns me? What is happening outside my immediate world that is unfair, unjust, or needs reform? What do I like to read? What interests do I have? What recent televisions or movies or books have you read? And what specific courses or issues covered in my courses have interested me? And those questions I think are helpful in jogging the brain to think of different potential topics that you guys can select for your informative speech. All right. So, what are some challenges of informative speaking? So, the speaker needs to consider what essential material the audience should know about a topic. Anytime that you're giving a speech, you only have so much time. This means that you have to choose which information is essential and which information is non-essential or is extraneous and should be cut out of the speech. We've all listened to speeches before that go way too in depth on a specific detail that is completely unnecessary in a general overview, right? This can especially apply to policy questions of policy, right? So like sometimes politicians will be like going over this really like technical specific thing, and they should be considering the bigger picture, right? So every piece of information should contribute to advancing the speech topic and purpose. And this is essentially what I call considering the scope, right? And one way to consider the scope is to consider the audience. So if you know that your audience already has a certain background or a certain understanding of the topic beforehand, you can cut out a lot of the basic information because you know they already know it. Or conversely, if you know that they don't have a background in it, then maybe you need to take a second to go over the basics to make sure everyone is on the same page. Okay, so then let's go into types of speech delivery. So there are 4 types of speech delivery. One is improvised. So improvised is just where you're winging it, making it up on the spot. This is not what we want to do. This can have its merits in some situations. With enough practice, you can be like quick on your feet, and you can get to a point where you can have a speech come out of thin air. But that's not what we're gonna do. The next is memorized. This is also one we're not going to do. Memorized, obviously, is where you have the whole speech in your brain, the exact wording of it, and are delivering it from memory. This can be a problem because people who do this don't always consider how the audience is reacting because they're focusing on delivering the speech in the exact way that they have it memorized. And it's really important to read the audience and see if they're resonating with what you're saying, right? Similar to memorized is read speech. So some people will print out a speech, right? This is also very common for politicians. But this is the same problem as a memorized speech, that it doesn't interact with the audience. And it comes across as forced and less fluid. So the last one is called extemporaneous speech. That's what we're going to be doing for the most part in this class. And an extemporaneous speech is basically where you have an outline or note cards of the information and are using that to structure the speech, but not necessarily provide every single word for the speech. This is helpful because if you ever forget where you were going, you can look down really quick and read the note you've written and then remember the point you're going to make. But you can also be fluid with the speaking style and the delivery, and you can scan the audience, right? And you can see if people look confused, you can slow down. If they're nodding along, you can be like, all right, I can keep moving. I don't need to hyper focus on this one point. So it's the perfect balance between knowing what you're saying and being able to have like a comfortable and relaxed delivery style. Extemporaneous. Okay. Going into topic selection, you always want to ask yourself, what makes a good topic? Is this topic going to offend everyone in my audience? Is the information accurate? Is it in good taste? And sound judgment, right? Is it basically a speech that is worth giving, right? Sometimes people convey information that is needlessly just going to antagonize everyone, and we don't want to do that. All right. So getting back to narrowing the topic. So you want to think about making sure the topic isn't too broad. So does the topic relate to recent events that may concern my listeners? Does my speech relate to current events that are sort of in the public's purview? Like, do they know about it, right? Can you convince your listeners to care as much about the potential topic as you do? Sometimes you can be really passionate about something, but you know that it's going to be really hard to convince anyone else to care about it. Maybe that's not a great speech. Do you have sufficient time to cover the topic adequately? If you were trying to give like a really complicated informative speech about a complex math question, it might not be the best spot to give the speech because you don't have enough time to convey the information. Next is, does the audience already know about it? So it can be boring to give a speech that everyone already has that information. And in doing this, you want to think, what sort of experiences has your audience already had? Will they be able to relate to the speech? And then sort of what things do you and the listeners have in common? So what sort of commonalities already exist that impact the references or the information you're conveying? All right, so real quick on delivery. Delivery is the second most important part of the speech. Some people say it's like the first most important part, but I still think it's second to content. Because if you have like the best delivery in the world, but you're saying gibberish, people will not be impressed by it. But delivery is super important. So basic things that help make you a good public speaker is things like eye contact, which involves, quick scans. So you want to make eye contact with, if there's a big audience, right, with certain people, but you don't want to like leer at anyone for too long because that'll make them uncomfortable. But you don't want to appear like you're spacing out or sort of staring off into like the sky, because then people will think you're not really paying attention. You want to control inflection and pitch, right? So you don't want to talk too like quickly, or you don't want to sound like if there's a recording and it's been sped up and people are like right? Like I feel like it's very easy for people giving a speech to just start talking really rapidly because they're trying to get the speech out of the way, but this comes across like very nervous and sort of undermines your ability to convey the information effectively. Next is volume. So I feel like it's very, very common for students to either talk really, really quiet when they're giving speeches, because I think people think if I say it really quietly, no one will hear what I'm saying, and therefore no one will be able to judge what I'm saying. But this, like, is sort of an a priori ineffective public speaking because no one can hear what you're saying. The same thing for talking too loudly. It just sounds like you're shouting, and nobody wants to hear that. Another thing is fluency. This can be really difficult. I'm actually not super great at it myself, which I personally blame on being from California, where everyone talks really slow. But you want to cut out the sort of filler words. Like some people they'll say like a lot. I say like a lot, or right. And those things are unnecessary and can take away from time that you could be using to convey the information. Lastly is like body movements or hand gestures. A lot of people have a tendency to sort of pace back and forth when giving speeches, and it looks a little weird. Similarly, people kind of do these things, or they'll bob around, or they're kind of like shuffle their feet. And you want to have some sort of fluidity, right, with moving with hand gestures, or sort of moving around so you don't look too stiff, but you also don't want to kind of look like you're falling all over the place. So those are the basics of delivery. Some last points on delivery really quick is that if there's like a podium or a lectern, you don't want to like hide behind the podium. Some people do that and they kind of like will try and like disappear behind it. What else? You want to avoid the content not matching the delivery. So for example, if you're talking about a really sad topic, and you just sound really cheery, you're gonna come across insensitive, right? And the other way around too. If you're talking about a really happy topic, but you just seem bummed out, it's not gonna work, and you're gonna sound like a weirdo. Okay, so hopefully that was a helpful introduction to informative speaking. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email me. Yeah, topic selections are due Friday. So I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. Yeah, have a good week.